Asia. Good evening, America. You're watching World DNA with me, Raisha Sehgal.
And my name is Hem Korsaro, and on the show, it's the fourth and the final night of the Democratic National Convention. Vice President, Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris will be delivering the keynote address today as she accepts her party's historic nomination at the DNC, which is currently underway in Chicago. We'll get you all the highlights from that on the show today.
Also on World DNA, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be visiting Ukraine later today, a first by an Indian PM since diplomatic ties were established between both the countries 30 years ago. Prime Minister Modi is carrying a message against escalation and in favor of peace. We will be tracking that. Prime Minister Modi's 8-hour stay in Ukraine on the show today. But first, a quick check on the headlines.
Fourth and final night of Democratic National Convention underway in Chicago. Vice President Kamala Harris to officially accept party's nomination for president.
Gaza ceasefire and hostage release deal now in sight. U.S. envoy to UN tells Security Council, urges members to press Hamas to accept the bridging proposal agreed by Israel.
Ukraine uses US-made bomb to strike Russian platoon command post in Kursk region of Russia. Putin accuses Kyiv of trying to attack Kursk nuclear power station.
Resident doctors in India call off their strike over the rape and murder of a trainee doctor in Kolkata after an appeal by the Supreme Court. Doctors to review their position in a span of 2 weeks.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to arrive in Kyiv today to meet Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. Bilateral ties, the Russia-Ukraine war on the agenda.
Pentagon hails ties with India ahead of meeting between Defense Secretary Lord Austin and India's Defense Minister Rajnath Singh. Says military-to-military relationship between the two countries is strong.
NASA plans to make decision on whether to allow astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sunita Williams to leave the International Space Station aboard a Boeing core spacecraft on Saturday, move to end weeks of speculation about their return to Earth.
BMW surpasses Tesla as the top-selling electric car brand in Europe for the first time. Meanwhile, EV sales, they lose ground as uncertainties around EV subsidies and incentives grow.
The draws for the US Open are out. Top seed Yannick Sinner and reigning French Open and Wimbledon champion Carlos Alcaraz are on a semi-final collision course.
The Democratic National Convention enters its fourth and the final day, with Vice President Kamala Harris all set to formally accept the party's presidential nomination in Chicago.
Right, and Harris has electrified the Democrats, wiping out Trump's poll lead in the space of a single month since President Joe Biden dropped out of the contest. A race compilation of national polls by 538, which is a polling website, shows Harris leading Trump by 47.2% to 43.6%. Before Harris takes the stage, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper, civil rights leader Al Sharpton will ascend to the podium. The theme of the finale is for our future. In her speech, Harris is widely expected to offer her vision and policy agenda to the American people.
Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump continued his policy-based and personal attacks on Harris. On a tour of the U.S.-Mexico border in Arizona, Trump targeted Harris over immigration, calling her a border Caesar. He recounted stories of people he said were killed by migrants who had come across the border illegally and claimed Harris will not address the issue in her speech today.
As Kamala gives her convention speech tonight, she will not mention the victims. She won't even talk about them, although now that she sees us, maybe she will. She'll not say their names or express remorse to their families. Kamala says she wants to talk about the future. No, these people want to go back to the safe past. We don't have a future with open borders and all of the other problems this country has.
All right, and for more on this, we are now being joined by our correspondent, Susan Tehrani. Susan, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, Vice President Kamala Harris will conclude the Democratic National Convention today by accepting her party's historical nomination for her presidency bid. What are some of the key objectives or the issues that she is likely to touch upon?
Yeah, this is Kamala Harris's most important speech, possibly in her entire life, because not the people that are in that convention center so much, but she has an opportunity to somewhat reinvent herself for the American voter and for those that are uncommitted even within her own party. It's not going to be easy, but we are told that she will finally address some policy issues. That's something she has to do, not just tonight, but starting tomorrow as well. There's a huge gap in how she plans to lead the country, how much she wants to distance herself from the Biden administration, and how much will it be a continuation of that. We have heard some economic policies coming out from her camp, but we've never heard directly from her. It's usually from surrogates or supporters and campaign managers. So this is going to be important, and it's going to be important in foreign policy issues as well. It's not just Americans, but I think a lot of people around the world will be watching as well.
Right, Susan, now border issues and the economy, there are some issues that every American is concerned about. But both these issues did not receive much mention in the previous DNC speeches that we witnessed in the past 3 days. Do you think that this was intentional? And will Kamala Harris be covering these topics?
I mean, that's it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's been such a huge gap regarding border security, immigration, which are on top of voters' mind during this convention. I mean, to be honest, what is the record of the Biden-Harris administration on border security? It's not the best. So we're not surprised that they haven't covered it. But ultimately, as you mentioned, they have to address it. She says that she's going to be tough on border security. Some Americans might say, well, she was responsible for the border, finding the root causes and whatnot. What has she done? But they're really going to look at the Biden administration's record when it comes to the issue of immigration and border security. That's going to be a very, very tough challenge for her. And then the issue of the economy. The economic outlook right now is pretty grim. The Labor Department had to put a revision out about how many jobs was created. About 1 million extra was reported. So Americans are going to look at their pocketbooks and they're going to wonder whether or not Kamala Harris is the person that can, revive this economy and uncertainty as well among voters. So she's got a tough task ahead of her. But for her supporters, she can do no wrong, of course.
Right, Susan, now let's also talk about the theme for the finale. It is for our future. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, a lot of speeches regarding gun control, gun rights activists, victims of gun violence. They have taken the stage one after the other. There is this sort of theme that has been the same almost every night. It's about freedoms. The issue of abortion was also brought up right now. The issue of, Roe v. Wade. These are issues that they hope to hammer in and relate with voters tonight. But it was interesting to see that they did have a very diverse crowd coming up on stage, not only from singers, but also from, the people that talked as well. We're expected to also hear from Republican Adam Kinzinger. You may remember he was part of that January 6th panel that was against the former president. So there's going to be a lot of Trump talking again tonight as well, as has been.
Right, Susan, thank you so much for joining us on World DNA. We'll, of course, be tracking Kamala's historic speech and her biggest night of a political career so far. Thank you for joining us on the show.
All right, urging the UN Security Council to press Hamas to accept a bridging proposal agreed to by Israel, the US envoy in the United Nations has told the Council's members that a Gaza ceasefire and hostage release deal is now in sight.
Right, US Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, said a bridging proposal put forward last week by the US, Qatar and Egypt was consistent with the plan outlined by US President Joe Biden in the month of May and endorsed by the Security Council in June.
We now have a path forward to save lives, bring relief to the people of Gaza, get the hostages back home, and de-escalate regional tensions. Again, Israel has accepted the bridging proposal. Now Hamas must do the same.
Now this comes as tensions continue to rise in West Asia as Israel and Hezbollah carried out drone strikes and counter-strikes on each other.
Various locations in southern Lebanon erupted in flames as Israeli warplanes unleashed a barrage of strikes against Hezbollah strongholds. The Israeli Defense Forces claimed to have targeted an extensive network of weapon storage facilities in the area. Hezbollah, on the other hand, rained down rockets and drones on Israeli border areas. Hezbollah launched 50 rockets in Katzarin, which is an area in northern Israel, causing substantial damage.
Yemen's Houthis claim to have targeted an oil tanker and a vessel in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The EU's Red Sea Naval Mission said that the Greek-flagged Sunian oil tanker carrying 150,000 tons of crude was evacuated by its crew after the attack and now poses an environmental hazard.
Well, let's now shift our focus to the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, where Ukraine has now claimed the usage of American-made munitions against the Russian forces in Kursk.
Ukraine's Air Force on Thursday released a footage claiming that it used US-made high-precision GBU-38 bombs to target Russian platoon command posts here. Several allies of Ukraine, including the United States and the UK, have been supplying both offensive and defensive weapons to its forces. Although these weapon systems come with certain usage restrictions on how and when they could be used to hit targets inside Russian territory. This highlights a major concern of the allied countries of a possible retaliation from Russia, which can draw NATO countries into the conflict.
Parallel to this, Ukraine also sank a Russian ferry carrying fuel tanks in an aerial attack on a southern Russian port of Kavkaz. This was later confirmed by Russian officials, including the governor of Krasnodar region.
The officials, however, did not specify the weapon used in the attack. Ukraine in recent weeks has targeted various Russian road and rail bridges with aerial attacks in Crimea that enabled connectivity to the Russian mainland.
Meanwhile, a Russian drone on Thursday killed 2 civilians and wounded a third in Ukraine's Sumy region, located on the border with Russia. The Ukrainian troops have launched an incursion since earlier this month in the Kursk region, which lies in close proximity to Ukraine's Sumy region.
Amidst the raging conflict, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, in his latest speech, has shed light on the reasoning behind the Kursk incursion. Speaking at an event in Kyiv, Zelensky said that the push inside the region is supposed to help end the war under the conditions of an independent Ukraine. He said that Ukraine's incursion was part of a systematic effort to end the 30-month-old war on Kyiv's terms.
Our defensive operations in Donetsk region, Kharkiv region, in the south of Ukraine, our liberation from Russia's Black Sea Fleet, our operation in the Kursk region, and our almost daily strikes on Russian military targets, they are all our systematic efforts in defending Ukraine, and our effort to end the war under the conditions of an independent Ukraine.
Now, 2 weeks since Ukraine launched its audacious attack on Russia's Kursk region, Moscow now says Kyiv could attack a nuclear plant in this region.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has accused Ukraine of attempting an overnight strike on the Kursk nuclear power plant. The nuclear station is situated about 40 kilometers west of Kursk, a city of around 500,000 people. It has 2 active reactors, 2 decommissioned older units, and 2 partly built ones. According to reports, the head of UN's nuclear watchdog is due to visit the nuclear power plant in Kursk next week. He has said that the risk associated with the attack, and I'm quoting, is very serious, as the facility could be damaged during Ukraine's incursion into the region.
The threat of a nuclear accident is increasing by the day as the Ukraine war drags on. The other high-risk zone is the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in southeast Ukraine. That was the scene of an alarming situation a few days ago. An attack in the vicinity had led to a fire that the UN's nuclear watchdog reported was fully extinguished. Both Ukraine and Russia pointed fingers at each other for that blaze. Ukrainian President Zelensky accused Russian forces of deliberately starting the fire as a form of blackmail. The Kremlin-installed governor of Zaporizhzhia claimed Ukrainian shelling was responsible for the incident.
For Ukrainians, the fighting around the nuclear facility brings back painful memories that they already witnessed in 1986. How technology, which produces clean energy, can also cause a disaster at Chernobyl.
All right, let's also consider what would happen in case there is an explosion at a nuclear power plant. A catastrophic explosion, experts warn, could result in a massive release of radiation. In the immediate aftermath, thousands affected by acute radiation poisoning could have long-term health effects, including increased cancer cases.
The danger does not stop at the explosion itself. Damage to the cooling systems of the reactors that could also trigger a meltdown, leading to uncontrollable heat buildup and further spread of radiation in the area.
After the visit to Poland comes to an end, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is now on his way to Kyiv from Warsaw.
On Thursday night, Prime Minister Modi departed from Warsaw to board a train to Kyiv. Prime Minister Modi will be on board a Polish train for a 15 to 20-hour train journey that will take him to the Ukrainian capital. Well, exact details of the journey and time of Prime Minister Modi's arrival have not been shared for security reasons.
An Indian Prime Minister's visit to Ukraine is a first in nearly 3 decades, and it's been closely watched for all sorts of emerging signals, especially coming as it does in the backdrop of the Russia-Ukraine war. Ahead of the Indian leader's visit, WION's diplomatic correspondent Siddhant Sibbal spoke to several Ukrainian lawmakers on how this visit can strengthen the ties between both the countries. Listen to this.
It will be a very good visit. We are happy to host him, Narendra Modi, in Ukraine, and we're happy to host him also in Parliament if he will have enough time during his visit.
Well, the Indian diaspora in Ukraine is also looking forward to Prime Minister Modi's visit. Many of them see a glimmer of hope amidst the turmoil. We explore how this visit could perhaps shape the future of Ukraine and offer fresh perspective on the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war.
Now, Prime Minister Modi's Ukraine visit will come nearly a month after he met Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. The two traditionally close allies had met on a day when Russian missiles pounded Ukraine, killing scores of people. Zelensky had described the meeting as a huge disappointment and a devastating blow to peace efforts. He also asked for Prime Minister Modi to visit.
And a principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal, sends us this report on the Indian Prime Minister's historic visit. Take a look.
Big day today. The Ukrainian president will have a guest that is the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. This will be a significant visit that will be closely watched by the international community and especially by Moscow. Now, this is the first visit of an Indian Prime Minister to Ukraine, not only since the war, but also since the country's independence. Now, India has emphasized on dialogue and diplomacy and as to how the focus should be not war, but peace, and a solution cannot come on the battlefield. All in all, India's focus areas have been on reconstruction efforts and also on how India can provide humanitarian assistance. India has in the past provided humanitarian assistance and that is expected to increase. But this is a visit which sees the big meeting between the Indian Prime Minister and the Ukrainian President, the third such meeting between the two leaders since the war broke out. With video journalist Neeraj Patel, Siddhant Sibal for WION in Kyiv, Ukraine.
Let's shift our focus now. The Supreme Justice Tribunal of Venezuela has ratified President Nicolas Maduro's victory in the July 28 presidential election.
The Supreme Tribunal said that it had reviewed material from the Electoral Authority to arrive at this decision. The court president claimed that Maduro won the election. She added that the decision cannot be appealed.
The National Electoral Council is hereby urged to publish the final results of the electoral process held on July 28, 2024 for the election of the President of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela in the Electoral Gazette of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Now, the tribunal announcement seals institutional backing for the ruling party. However, it may not be enough to stop the anti-government protests that are going on in the country. The opposition has alleged that despite being constitutionally independent, the court operates as an arm of the ruling party.
On Wednesday, the opposition parties pointed out the Supreme Court is carrying out electoral functions by carrying out the procedure to ratify Maduro's victory. The opposition has argued that the court's ruling cannot be valid as it violates the constitutional rules of separation of powers. The ratification gives Maduro, who took office in 2013, another 6-year term set to begin in January.
The Electoral Authority has said Maduro won just over half of the votes. It did not, however, publish full tallies. On the other hand, the opposition published online what it says are 83% of voting machine tallies that give its candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez, a 67% support.
Human rights organizations have charged Maduro's administration with arresting opposition figures and demonstrators. The administration has also mounted investigations into the opposition leaders for allegedly inciting the military to commit crimes. While many Western countries have urged full publication of the results, Russia, China and others have congratulated Maduro on his victory.
Maduro had asked the court to verify the election results. The court's judges summoned all the candidates to hand over the copies of voting machine tallies they are entitled to by law. Opposition Gonzalez did not attend the summons. Rodriguez called the opposition's failure to hand over its copies and Gonzalez's non-appearance as blatant disrespect and exposes him to sanctions.
Moving on, a fresh wave of demonstrations have erupted in Indonesia.
These are over proposed changes to the country's election law and at the receiving end of public dissent is the country's President Joko Widodo.
Early in the day, demonstrators were seen clashing with the police in the capital. Demonstrators also set fire to several items on the road as public outrage poured onto the streets. The demonstrations erupted as the country's parliament prepared to reverse a constitutional court order with respect to age requirements for contestants ahead of the upcoming regional polls.
I came here to the Parliament building to represent the aspiration of the people because this country is now not in good condition. It has been damaged, especially because of President Joko Widodo and his cronies.
The Parliament's move to alter the election law supersedes a court ruling that made President Widodo's youngest son, 29-year-old Kaisang Pangarap, ineligible to contest. Dissenters and critics are slamming the legislative change, alleging that the incumbent president is trying to retain political influence.
Today, the state of democracy in Indonesia is messy and not in good order because of a lot of interference by Joko Widodo, who is abusing his power in the government.
While demonstrations broke out only recently, dissent among people that has been brewing for a while now. Months earlier, several critics and Indonesians, they accused the government of nepotism after the Indonesian president's eldest son was elected as the country's youngest vice president.
And with that, it's time now for a short break.
But don't go anywhere. On the other side of World DNA, we'll get you a story from India where the demonstrations by the resident doctors at several government hospitals across India against rape and murder case of a trainee doctor in Kolkata, that has now ended. Most major doctors' associations have called off the 11-day strike. We'll get you the complete story right after this short break.
Also on the other side, US Vice President Kamala Harris all set to formally accept the party's presidential nomination in Chicago on the final day of the Democratic National Convention. Stay tuned for that.
Namaste. Hello, friends. We did Dr. Subhash Chandra show, popularly known as DSC show, for 4 years, from August 2014 to August 2018. 28 states of Bharat. Of course, we reached out to all of you in 190 countries across the world. The show was very successful. Each episode was being watched by almost 25 million people every week. For past 6 years, the demand of the show has never died down. People write to us, people ask for the show to restart again. Hence, we are beginning the show once again on All Z Network, also on WION, which is the global network channel from India. Again, thank you for your love and affection. See you soon at Subhash Chandra Show.
To bring the benefits of the Subhash Chandra Show to your educational institution, teachers and students, send an invitation to Juhi Jha at yoursarthi@such.org.in.
Welcome back to World DNA. Thank you so much for staying with us. Lots lined up for you on this side of the show. Let's get started with the headlines first.
Fourth and final night of Democratic National Convention underway in Chicago. Vice President Kamala Harris to officially accept party's nomination for president.
Gaza ceasefire and hostage release deal now in sight. US envoy to Hotel Security Council urges members to press Hamas to accept bridging proposal agreed on by Israel.
Ukraine uses US-made bomb to strike Russian platoon command post in Kursk region of Russia. Putin accuses Kiev of trying to attack Kursk nuclear power station.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to arrive in Kyiv today to meet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Bilateral ties, the Russia-Ukraine war on the agenda.
Pentagon hails ties with India ahead of meeting between Defence Secretary Lord Austin and India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh. Says military-to-military ties between both the countries strong.
All right, before we go on any further, we take you to Chicago, where the 49th Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, is addressing the Democratic National Convention on its final night. Let's go across to that.
Thank you so very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Okay, let's get to business. Let's get to business. All right. So let me start by thanking my most incredible husband, Doug, for being an incredible partner to me, an incredible father to Cole and Ella, and happy anniversary, Dougie. I love you so very much. To our President Joe Biden, when I think about the path that we have traveled together, Joe, I am filled with gratitude. Your record is extraordinary, as history will show, and your character is inspiring And Doug and I love you and Jill and are forever thankful to you both. And to Coach Tim Walz, you are going to be an incredible vice president. And to the delegates and everyone who has put your faith in our campaign, your support is humbling. So, America, the path that led me here in recent weeks was no doubt unexpected. But I'm no stranger to unlikely journeys. So, my mother, our mother, Kamala Harris, had one of her own. And I miss her every day, and especially right now. And I know she's looking down smiling. I know that. So my mother was 19 when she crossed the world alone, traveling from India to California with an unshakable dream to be the scientist who would cure breast cancer. When she finished school, she was supposed to return home to a traditional arranged marriage. But as fate would have it, she met my father, Donald Harris, a student from Jamaica. They fell in love and got married, and that act of self-determination made my sister Maya and me. Growing up, we moved a lot. I will always remember that big Mayflower truck packed with all our belongings, ready to go to Illinois, to Wisconsin, and wherever our parents' jobs took us. My early memories of our parents together are very joyful ones. A home filled with laughter and music, Aretha, Coltrane, and Miles. At the park, my mother would say, "Stay close." But my father would say, as he smiled, "Run, Kamala, run. Don't be afraid. Don't let anything stop you." From my earliest years, he taught me to be fearless. But the harmony between my parents did not last. When I was in elementary school, they split up, and it was mostly my mother who raised us. Before she could finally afford to buy a home, she rented a small apartment in the East Bay. In the Bay, you either live in the hills or the flatlands. We lived in the flats, a beautiful working-class neighborhood of firefighters, nurses, and construction workers, all who tended their lawns with pride. My mother, she worked long hours, and like many working parents, she leaned on a trusted circle to help raise us. Mrs. Shelton, who ran the daycare below us and became a second mother. Uncle Sherman, Aunt Mary, Uncle Freddie, Auntie Chris, none of them family by blood, and all of them family by love. Family who taught us how to make gumbo, how to play chess, and sometimes even let us win. Family who loved us, believed in us, and told us we could be anything and do anything. They instilled in us the values they personified: community, faith, and the importance of treating others as you would want to be treated, with kindness, respect, and compassion. My mother was a brilliant, 5-foot-tall, brown woman with an accent. And as the eldest child, as the eldest child, I saw how the world would sometimes treat her. But my mother never lost her cool. She was tough, courageous, a trailblazer in the fight for women's health, and she taught Maya and me a lesson that Michelle mentioned the other night. She taught us to never complain about injustice, but do something about it. Do something about it. That was my mother. And she taught us, and she also taught us, and never do anything half-assed. And that is a direct quote. A direct quote. I grew up immersed in the ideals of the civil rights movement. My parents had met at a civil rights gathering, and they made sure that we learned about civil rights leaders, including the lawyers like Thurgood Marshall and Constance Baker Motley, those who battled in the courtroom to make real the promise of America. So at a young age, I decided I wanted to do that work. I wanted to be a lawyer. And when it came time to choose the type of law I would pursue, I reached a pivotal moment in my life. You see, when I was in high school, I started to notice something about my best friend, Wanda. She was sad at school, and there were times she didn't want to go home. So one day I asked if everything was all right, and she confided in me that she was being sexually abused by her stepfather. And I immediately told her she had to come stay with us, and she did. This is one of the reasons I became a prosecutor, to protect people like Wanda, because I believe everyone has a right to safety, to dignity, and to justice. As a prosecutor, when I had a case, I charged it not in the name of the victim, but in the name of the people. For a simple reason. In our system of justice, a harm against any one of us is a harm against all of us. And I would often explain this to console survivors of crime, to remind them no one should be made to fight alone. We are all in this together. And every day in the courtroom, I stood proudly before a judge and I said 5 words: Kamala Harris for the people. And to be clear, my entire career, I've only had one client, the people. And so, on behalf of the people, on behalf of every American, regardless of party, race, gender, or the language your grandmother speaks, on behalf of my mother and everyone who has ever set out on their own unlikely journey, on behalf of Americans like the people I grew up with, people who work hard, chase their dreams, and look out for one another, on behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America. And with this election, nation with this election has a precious, fleeting opportunity to move past the bitterness, cynicism, and divisive battles of the past, a chance to chart a new way forward. Not as members of any one party or faction, but as Americans. And let me say, I know there are people of various political views watching tonight, and I want you to know, I promise to be a president for all Americans. You can always trust me to put country above party and self, to hold sacred America's fundamental principles, from the rule of law to free and fair elections to the peaceful transfer of power. I will be a president who unites us around our highest aspirations, a president who leads and listens, who is realistic, practical, and has common sense, and always fights for the American people. From the courthouse to the White House, that has been my life's work. As a young courtroom prosecutor in Oakland, California, I stood up for women and children against predators who abuse them. As Attorney General of California, I took on the big banks, delivered $20 billion for middle-class families who faced foreclosure, and helped pass a homeowner Bill of Rights, one of the first of its kind in the nation. I stood up for veterans and students being scammed by big for-profit colleges, for workers who are being cheated out of their wages, the wages they were due, for seniors facing elder abuse. I fought against the cartels who traffic in guns and drugs and human beings, who threaten the security of our border and the safety of our communities. And I will tell you, these fights were not easy, and neither were the elections that put me in those offices. We were underestimated at practically every turn, but we never gave up, because the future is always worth fighting for. For America's future. Fellow Americans, this election is not only the most important of our lives, it is one of the most important in the life of our nation. In many ways, Donald Trump is an unserious man. But the consequences of putting Donald Trump back in the White House are extremely serious. Consider not only the chaos and calamity when he was in office, but also the gravity of what has happened since he lost the last election. Donald Trump tried to throw away your votes. When he failed, he sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol, where they assaulted law enforcement officers. When politicians in his own party begged him to call off the mob and send help, he did the opposite. He fanned the flames. And now, for an entirely different set of crimes, he was found guilty of fraud by a jury of everyday Americans and separately found liable for committing sexual abuse. And consider what he intends to do if we give him power again. Consider his explicit intent to set free violent extremists who assaulted those law enforcement officers at the Capitol. His explicit intent to jail journalists, political opponents, and anyone he sees as the enemy. His explicit intent to deploy our active duty military against our own citizens. Consider the power he will have, especially after the United States Supreme Court just ruled that he would be immune from criminal prosecution. Just imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails, and how he would use the immense powers of the presidency of the United States, not to improve your life, not to strengthen our national security, but to serve the only client he has ever had, himself. And we know what a second Trump term would look like. It's all laid out in Project 2025, written by his closest advisors, and its sum total is to pull our country back to the past. But America, we are not going back. We are not going back. We are not going back. We are not going back to when Donald Trump tried to cut Social Security and Medicare. We are not going back to when he tried to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, when insurance companies could deny people with pre-existing conditions. We are not going to let him eliminate the Department of Education that funds our public schools. We are not going to let him end programs like Head Start that provide preschool and childcare for our children. America, we are not going back. And we are charting a new way forward. To a future with a strong and growing middle class, because we know a strong middle class has always been critical to America's success. And building that middle class will be a defining goal of my presidency. And I'll tell you, this is personal for me. The middle class is where I come from. My mother kept a strict budget. We lived within our means, yet we wanted for little. And she expected us to make the most of the opportunities that were available to us and to be grateful for them. Because, as she taught us, opportunity is not available to everyone. That's why we will create what I call an opportunity economy, an opportunity economy where everyone has the chance to compete and a chance to succeed. Whether you live in a rural area, small town, or big city. And as president, I will bring together labor and workers and small business owners and entrepreneurs and American companies to create jobs, to grow our economy, and to lower the cost of everyday needs like health care and housing and groceries. We will provide access to capital for small business owners and entrepreneurs and founders. And we will end America's housing shortage and protect Social Security and Medicare. Now compare that to Donald Trump, because I think everyone here knows he doesn't actually fight for the middle class. He doesn't actually fight for the middle class. Instead, he fights for himself and his billionaire friends. And he will give them another round of tax breaks that will add up to $5 trillion to the national debt. And all the while, he intends to enact what in effect is a national sales tax, call it a Trump tax, that would raise prices on middle-class families by almost $4,000 a year. Well, instead of a Trump tax hike, we will pass a middle-class tax cut that will benefit more than 100 million Americans. Friends, I believe America cannot truly be prosperous unless Americans are fully able to make their own decisions about their own lives, especially on matters of heart and home. But tonight, in America, too many women are not able to make those decisions. And let's be clear about how we got here. Donald Trump handpicked members of the United States Supreme Court to take away reproductive freedom. And now he brags about it. In his words, quote, "I did it and I'm proud to have done it," end quote. Well, I'll tell you, over the past 2 years, I've traveled across our country, and women have told me their stories. Husbands and fathers have shared theirs. Stories of women miscarrying in a parking lot, developing sepsis, losing the ability to ever again have children, all because doctors are afraid they may go to jail for caring for their patients. Couples just trying to grow their family, cut off in the middle of IVF treatments. Children who have survived sexual assault, potentially being forced to carry a pregnancy to term. This is what's happening in our country because of Donald Trump. And understand, he is not done. As a part of his agenda, he and his allies would limit access to birth control, ban medication abortion, and enact a nationwide abortion ban with or without Congress. And get this, he plans to create a national anti-abortion coordinator and force states to report on women's miscarriages and abortions. Simply put, they are out of their
And that was
mind.
the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris speaking on the final day of the DNC. She has formally accepted the nomination as the Democratic presidential nominee. She made her pitch to the voters and narrated her unexpected path and how her mother taught her to do something about injustice. She also mentioned her Indian roots during her speech. So far, she touched upon reproductive rights, economy and border issues. We're taking a short break, but we'll come right back with Harris's historic speech at the DNC. Stay tuned. You're watching WION World as well.
to breathe clean air and drink clean water and live free from the pollution that fuels the climate crisis, and the freedom that unlocks all the others, the freedom to vote.